If you follow tech headlines, you may have heard about a rogue AI agent that triggered a Sev1 emergency at Meta in the last week. Sounds crazy, right? But if you actually dig beneath the surface or you listen to this episode, you're going to find why I'm becoming more and more convinced we need to move away from our paranoia about AI Terminator outcomes, because the real danger is in AI catastrophes that are far less Hollywood and a lot more mundane. So hear me out. I'm Christopher Lind, and this is Future Focused. And this week, I'm going to break down this recent Meta Sev1 incident to separate the hype that you'll hear about online with the reality of what really happened, and lay out 3 specific things I think everybody should be looking at and considering to help protect themselves and their organizations from very real disasters like this. And I'd encourage you to stick around at the end, because there's one exercise in particular I think every single leader should be running with their teams this week, so that something like this doesn't end up happening to you, because it's very real. But before we get into it, if you find this episode helpful or you find value in my content, it would mean the world to me if you would like, subscribe, share this episode with somebody who would benefit from it. And if you feel so inclined, go to buymeacoffee.com/Christopher Lind and say thanks. And if you or your organization would benefit from services or expertise like mine, please check out my website at christopherlind.co. Okay, enough of that. Let's get into this, because what actually happened here? If you haven't seen this, essentially what happened was an employee at Meta, an actual human, okay, not the agent, went and they posed a question that they had on one of their internal forums. Asked a question, kind of put it out there for folks. And another employee found this question and handed it over to one of their internal AI agents. So he was using an AI agent, and he took the question and he presented it to him, asked it to come up with a solution. And what ended up happening was, rather than that AI agent simply presenting back the proposed solution to the individual that then they could review, approve, whatever, and then pass along, it just did it. It just went ahead and gave the person the solution. And that individual, thinking it was coming from this other person, just took it and they implemented it. And what AI came up with wasn't accurate. In fact, it was downright wrong and violated a bunch of Meta's own internal policies. And they implemented it without verifying anything. Now, to be clear, I couldn't find any details on whether the AI, what it did was generate actual code, or if it just wrote out like, here's what to do. But that's not really the point, because the technical syntax of what specifically did the AI agent do doesn't really matter. It's just that the behavioral failure actually occurred in people, because one thing I did come across as I dug into it a little bit more is that the agent, or however it presented this information, there was some sort of notation or way of identifying that the information that was shared by AI. It's just the person that read it and acted on it either overlooked it, didn't see it, didn't listen to it, whatever. I couldn't get all the specifics of that. But in either case, the whole incident broke access control, exposed very sensitive data internally for 2 hours, and triggered a Sev1, a severe 1 emergency, which, to be clear, at Meta, don't be fooled, Sev1 is not what Sev1 everywhere else is, which would be the highest level. At Meta, it's the second level. So I don't know, maybe Sev0 is the highest. Anyway, not the point. But my point is, it was serious. It was something that they actually needed to take care of and actually do something about. And what's interesting about this is that this actually does not surprise me at all. And this is one of the biggest concerns I have about AI. I know there's a lot of this fear around the AI apocalypse, and you'll see it in research when safety institutions, and they're legit, these AI agents will go rogue and they'll do things and they'll scheme. And I've covered it on here where they'll do some of this stuff. And it does happen. But I think those tend to be the areas that people put a lot of focus in. The technical experts are looking at ways to mitigate that and how do we isolate these kind of incidents. But then you have incidents like this that you go, well, this could literally happen anywhere. And I have a friend who works in the cybersecurity industry, and his area of specialty is social engineering, which, if you're not familiar with it, these are the technical experts who actually look at how do you human engineer security flaws, because that's actually where a lot of cyber terrorism is focused. They know they may not be able to breach the firewall or get, admin access or some of this other stuff, but what they can do is they can get Bill or Judy from the parking lot to, pick up a USB stick or let them follow them through the security access without scanning their badge, saying, oh, I forgot my badge. Can you just let me in today? And they know that that is a far more vulnerable channel to take. And it's also not only just more vulnerable, it's the most overlooked. Most companies, most organizations, most people don't invest a lot of effort into shoring up this risk, which is actually probably the biggest. So technically, did an AI agent cause chaos? I guess in a sense, but actually what AI did was it engineered a social engineering hack inadvertently. In fact, it didn't even scheme or plot it. It just did what it was asked and it overstepped. And I didn't see all the prompts. So who knows? The user may have actually even inadvertently did it based on the way they asked AI to do something. Whatever it was connected to the system that then it just acted on it, which is something, if you listen to me or have for very long, I talk about this all the time, where this is one of the risks of hooking up these agents to all of your systems and going, it'll be fine. Well, maybe, but all it takes is one little slip like this, and it just goes and it does something, and you might go, well, but it technically didn't execute the hack. You're right. But AI has this halo effect around it that prevents us from seeing things clearly. And when you throw humans into the mix who are ill prepared alongside that, you've got a recipe for disaster. And this one sent Meta spiraling because there's not a bug patch you can fix. You can't just send out a service update to try and fix this kind of stuff. So where does that leave us? Because you may be sitting there going, wow, that's a rather terrifying and human concern that you may have. And it is. So what do you do with it? Well, there's three things that, as I sat and thought about this, I thought, what is something that we all could be thinking about? Now, the first one's a little bit of a two-part one, which is really understanding your user acceptance policy. And I know that compliance documents aren't always the most exciting things, but when you think about how quickly organizations are moving to implement these big AI systems, often turning on advanced capabilities very quickly with little to no support for their employees. You're implementing Copilot or Gemini and you're flipping on the agent capability, either assuming people won't know what to do with it or assuming it's pretty straightforward or misunderstanding the risks. If you're not taking the time to actually outline, hey, what is acceptable and what is not? And are people, not only did you just send this out in an email where you said, yeah, Christopher, we did. We updated our user acceptance policy, which, just for the record, in a lot of the work I do and a lot of the conversations I have, most people haven't even taken this step. Most people haven't even taken the step to say, hey, have we actually gone through and made sure our documents are updated to reflect the technology that we now officially support and advocate our employees use? Because if you look at the number of companies that are now telling their employees, you better be using AI. I mean, it's not a like, hey, it's available to you. In many companies, it's now a requirement. It's going to show up in your, it's going to show up in your performance review if you're not doing it. And then you go, well, have you at least communicated what they can and can't do with that? It's like, well, we're working on it. We got a team together to update. It's like cart before the horse here. And so now is a really good time to take a look at this. Do you have a technical user acceptance policy? Does it reflect the supported systems? I get you may not be able to account for every rogue system people may be using, but there are general things you can put in place to say, hey, we need to at least make sure that we have some of this. And this is going to become really, really critical when I get to my next point of what we need to do with this. Because if you don't have this, let's just say if you didn't really tell people they couldn't do it, or you didn't warn people about the consequences of this, it becomes a lot harder to do something about it when it happens. So that would be a really good thing to do right now, is to do a spot check on that. And maybe if your corporate one isn't updated, why don't you set one up for you and your teams in your organization, just to make sure you've covered yourself? But I think that actually goes to the second part of this first step, which is, when I talk to executives and organizational leaders right now, one of the biggest challenges they have is they'll say, Christopher, look, like, I get it, but we only officially support these systems. We know people are using countless other systems. In fact, my own recommendation is, if you try and lock down everything, you're only just creating more friction for people to work around. And I'm not saying just open the floodgates, but I do warn that trying to compliance your way out of unacceptable use doesn't work very well, which presents this challenge that I face all the time, where people go, well, what do we do? There's too many AI tools out there. It's integrated into everything. There's no possible way we can lock this thing down. And the reality is more and more organizations are recognizing that there needs to be some sort of baseline for acceptable AI use that you just ground people in, and you know where your organization stands. Now, fair warning, this is something that I do and specialize in, but I'm not saying this to try and just plug my product. Yeah, of course, I have a product that addresses this called the AI effectiveness rating, which is designed to baseline your employees and guide them on, hey, these are key areas for effective AI use, and here's where your gaps are that you need to shore up, while also giving the organization data into, well, where do we stand? So yes, do I have a product that solves this problem? I do. And if that's something that would be a benefit, or you're curious about, reach out or check out the website. You can look it up. But I don't just share this as a thing purely from a pitch my wares to you. Whether you use mine or not, this is a huge gap, because when you don't define AI effectiveness, and when I say AI effectiveness, if you look at my 6 categories for effectiveness, I'm not just talking about how well do you know how to use the tech, because you can be really effective with the tech and terribly ineffective with AI. In fact, you may be creating more harm than good with it. And I think that's one of the really important things when it comes to AI effectiveness and actually defining this. You can't just throw out a user acceptance policy and say, hey, everybody, here's what you can and can't do. You also have to understand, you need to prepare these people. You need to help them go, here's what good looks like, broadly speaking. Not just how do you execute, do you know how to create an agent? Do you know how to execute one of these things autonomously? No, here is what effective use looks like. Here's where your gaps are. Here's what needs to be closed, so that you as an organization can prepare your workforce, who now, again, it's not going to be just rogue agents that cause problems. It's going to be this intermixing of AI and people. And as they lack the distinguishment and discernment to know what's what, do they know how to discern and when to use AI, when to not? And so this is why this step of making sure you've defined at a high level, hey, here's just organizationally what is in and what's out. And then on an individual level, here's what AI effectiveness looks like. And here's how you need to close your gaps. You need to personalize that for people. If you're missing these things, I'm telling you right now, you are sitting on more unmitigated risk than you can prepare for. And unfortunately, many organizations aren't doing anything about it until a SEV 1 incident occurs, until something catastrophic like this happens. And the unfortunate part is, all of this is avoidable. These 2 things I just outlined, you could do them this week. You could do them today. You could pause the podcast and go get started on them right now. But many organizations are like, it's fine. We're not going to worry about it right now. And it's causing major problems. And what happened at Meta is just one example of the many to come if we don't do something about it. Now that transitions to number 2, because that's great if you have global enterprise policy or even organizational, functional policy in place. You've done the work to personalize and identify, hey, do people know how to use AI effectively? Here's where they are. None of that matters if you don't hold people accountable to things. And this is a direct message to leaders right now, because if you look at where we are in the world, the gap between responsibility and accountability just continues to divide. And actually, one of the big risks that I consistently see with AI is it's becoming the go-to scapegoat for people. To say, well, AI told me to, or the agent did it. I didn't ask it to. And in this instance, actually demonstrates some of these really legitimate ones where you go, well, technically, if they didn't specifically instruct the agent to go to the forum and post the solution to that person, are they really accountable for that? If the person technically just took the instructions and it was represented in a way that was obscure, or it wasn't super clear that this was a unreviewed autonomous AI response. Because again, the problem with this autonomous AI response, the person who's getting the response, they don't even technically know that the person who put it into AI actually got clarity on what they were asking for. It just, right, you've added another chain into the link of communication, which everybody knows the game of telephone. Things start to break down. So again, could you see a world where they go, well, I didn't tell the agent to do it. Well, I didn't have clear communication that they had put in the wrong question, or that this was actually coming directly from AI without a review from someone like that. And you can see where pretty soon everybody's going like this, and everybody goes, well, who do we actually hold accountable for this? And so you need to build in accountability structures into the world, because accidents do happen. And so my goal here isn't to say, hey, go out there and every time a mistake happens with AI, you need to terminate everybody. That would be ridiculous. And quite frankly, you'd end up with no employees and you'd have a culture of fear that would just be catastrophic. So to be clear, that is not what I'm advocating for, because the reality is this isn't unique to AI. It's not like mistakes didn't happen in a pre-AI world. Nobody ever gave an instruction before it was fully baked out, or no one ever acted on something that they technically shouldn't have because a policy somewhere stated it. This stuff happened, but you do need to do more to make sure people know that it's not okay to say AI did it or AI told me to. And have you communicated that to your people? Are they aware that the way the organization handles accountability is anything? And sometimes I get asked this question, Christopher, well, what do you think is a reasonable level of things? And my personal take on this is, you are responsible for whatever you put AI in charge of. And so unless AI directly contradicts what you put it in charge of and gave clear instructions on, you are responsible for that. And people might go, well, boy, I'm doing all this stuff with it. I've got it on all these things. I can't possibly be taking responsibility for everything it does. Well, then going back to my AI effectiveness thing, then maybe you need to understand how to use AI effectively, because truly, if you're putting AI on things and not paying attention to it, AI is not going to be held accountable. You will be. And to be fair, this is a far more complicated issue than just hold everybody accountable for what they make AI do. Well, organizations, you also need to look at how hard are you pressing people, because I was reading something the other day about a tech company and what they were expecting of their software engineers. I'm like, you're creating an environment that makes it literally impossible for people to not hand off critical decision-making and critical checkpoints to AI and just have to trust it in order just to keep their head afloat. And so this isn't just a message to employees. If you're an employee going, you need to just take on more accountability and responsibility. Yes, you do. In the sense that if you're asking AI to do something, you better darn well make sure that whatever it does, you at some point are making sure and confirming what it's doing and would take accountability for what you're having it do. So if you're putting it on top of something autonomously, you better be confident in saying, I trusted that this was a low risk enough thing that no matter what happened, even if AI went a direction I maybe didn't directly direct it to do, the risk was low. And you are accountable for that decision. Maybe you're not accountable for every decision, but you can at least demonstrate you put the thought into that. Maybe it's, saying, hey, I actually shouldn't let AI do this without some sort of checkpoint. Again, now in this instance, I don't know if the thing actually was intended to not post that, and that was outside the role of control. If that was the case, then that would be something that the agent didn't even necessarily do. That was an agent malfunction. If the person who put that command in there had their system set up, had enabled this functionality, and then had kind of directed it in a way where it naturally assumed that's what you wanted to do, that I would say the person who gave the instructions to the agent should be held accountable to some degree. To my earlier point, it doesn't mean everybody just needs to be fired. It just means you need to hold those people accountable and not shrug and go, oh, okay, AI did it. Because if you start creating a culture where AI did it, AI told me to, nothing I can do, it's going to be an absolute disaster. But on the leadership end, you need to be realistic about the implications of the workload you're putting on people and operating off these assumptions that if you just, as long as people have AI, they have infinite capacity. Well, they don't. And so if you're not preparing them to use AI effectively, you're not supporting them through, policies around, hey, what do we allow and what do we not? You're not even giving them the tools to come back to you to say, listen, I know you're asking this, but if I actually were to do that, the only option it would leave for me is to actually trust AI to make these decisions. Are you fine with that? And that may be a way for those of you who are in a high stress environment where you're getting a lot of pressure. Maybe all you can do at this point is clearly communicate that the only way you can achieve what's being asked of you is to trust AI with decisions you have concerns about it making mistakes on. If you do that, you have done your due diligence to say, hey, I made it clear that this was the only way, and I was told proceed forward. Well, now that accountability has shifted to whatever leader told you, do it at all costs. And so that may be a way for those of you who may be going, I'm in an impossible situation. What am I supposed to do? Well, then communicate that up and clearly document that, hey, what's being expected is beyond my capacity to even govern and manage. And that can be a way you protect yourself. But leaders, you have a responsibility to lean into this and make sure you're not overburdening your teams to put them in a position where this is all they know, all they can do while still doing it. Because when AI generates the advice, but humans are the ones that told it what advice to give, and then the human actually went and implemented it, you can't say that a rogue AI agent caused a Sev 1 emergency at Meta. No, two people with the partnership of AI caused a Sev 1 catastrophe. Which, let's get to my third segment, because this is the one that I think everybody can implement with their teams. If you're on a team, you're not a leader, recommend doing it with your teams, with your peers. Bring it up to your boss. Go, hey, we should talk about this. If you're a leader, this is something you can do. But I have worked in the healthcare space for a very long time. And one of the things that the medical community is notorious for doing is they're called grand rounds. Now, if you're not familiar with a grand round, oftentimes what happens is if in a hospital or a medical settings, a patient dies, they'll do what's called a grand round, which is everybody comes together and it's about a no judgment space, but let's talk about what happened. Let's talk about openly, where did things go wrong? It's not so we can point fingers and can condemn. It's so that we can just say, hey, let's talk about the breakdown in the chain here and how this happened. And let's talk about it openly so that instead of people assuming, oh, it was, Jill or Bill's fault, let's just put it out there. Let's say, what exactly happened? Where did this question come from? Why did you post it on a forum instead of, go talk to your colleague? Okay, right? Not judging you. Why did you do that? Okay, great. Why did you, then what exactly happened after that? Why did you make the decision to hand it off to AI instead of you just doing that? Isn't that something that is your expertise? Shouldn't you know how to do that? Well, yeah, and again, it's not about judgment. It's about asking this so that you can clarify these things and bring this stuff into the light so you can go, okay, well, now we've outlined this whole thing. And now we can accurately assess where are things so that we can close this up. And you have an opportunity to do this at your company right now. Now, you may have your own use case. Maybe something recently went sideways with AI. I would highly recommend you use that. Maybe there is something within your team. Maybe you ask your team, hey, has there been something, like this that has happened? If not, use this meta story. Use the content of this podcast as the foundation, as the baseline to facilitate this discussion with your teams. Talk about exactly what happened. Find out, hey, where might something like this happen? Run through the situation. Talk openly about all the different cases. And this is why you need a diverse group of people together to talk about it so you can bring these different perspectives to go, well, what might have contributed to that? Okay, well, let's talk about that. What might we do about that? When are we faced with some of these things? You can ask your team openly. Okay, well, let's say an internal AI agent gave us flawed instructions in a high pressure environment where we just need to execute on this. What vulnerabilities do we have in our current ecosystem, whether that's in the tools, whether it's in the capabilities, whether it's in the accountability structure, whether it's in just our systems? Where might this break and how might something like this happen? Because if you don't talk about it, or you just assume it's never going to happen, that is pretty much a guarantee that you're ensuring it will. But if you drag this out of a news headlines and bring it into your environment and make it a very real situation, you strip away the sci-fi fear of these autonomous AI agents that are going to do all this and it's completely out of your control, and you suddenly start to make it more tangible. You suddenly start having people start to weigh in on, aha, okay, I can see how something like this would happen. Here's where this might happen here. Here's what the risks might be should something like that happen. Have we considered this? Have we closed these gaps? Do we have systems in place? Is everybody in this room capable and comfortable with the tools that we have? Are you aware of the tools? Are you aware of the risks? Because when you really look into the breakdown, all of this could have been easily prevented. And maybe it was just a legitimate accident. Things happen. That's why I say, if you do a grand rounds type thing, you need to make it a no judgment environment. If you have an environment where people are afraid to acknowledge mistakes happen or are afraid to admit there are vulnerabilities in the system, well, that's a problem you've got to deal with in and of itself. You got to start with that. But if you have an environment where you can lean into it, and maybe you do have an environment that isn't super safe right now, psychologically safe, whatever, don't get mad and triggered by that word, but right, maybe you don't have that environment, then this meta use case may be a really safe way to present this kind of thing. And that's where maybe even if you do have an example, maybe it's a little too tense, maybe something popped off at your company recently and things did go sideways, and maybe the company didn't handle it well and this person took way too much heat, or there was no accountability and it's a little bit too sensitive right now. Fine, use the meta story. In either case, have this conversation. And if you've never heard of Grand Rounds, there you go. It's an opportunity for you to share with your teams how you're learning something new by engaging in different content that's helping you understand the complexity and the nuance of the challenges we face in this rapidly changing environment. And so we need to talk more openly as a team about this so that we can shore up these risks. We can identify what's really going on. We can be clear on how our workflows work and where they're vulnerable, so that we can work together to mitigate this, so we can work alongside AI, because the reality is, you just look at the data. AI is not going away, but it's also not going to turn into this nefarious Terminator that comes in and wipes us out all on its own accord. It's going to happen through much more trivial, mundane things like this that escalate super fast, because the reality is, I just game theoried this out for fun. I won't go through it all here for the sake of time, but I game theoried out some different ways this could have gone. And this could have gone a heck of a lot worse. And the thing is, AI is, I say it regularly, the most powerful catalyst and accelerant we have ever experienced in human history. And there is a world where this could have, it didn't, but it could have tanked Meta had a bunch of agents in partnership with people just gone out of control. And the thing with AI is it can happen faster than you can even imagine. So if you do nothing with this, I would encourage you to take these steps seriously and have this discussion this week. There's your biggest takeaway. Have this discussion this week. Talk about it with your peers and your teams. Organize something. Set it up as part of your team meeting. Go, you know what? We're going to take a pause in our afternoon. We're going to set up 45 minutes. We're going to come together. We're going to talk about this because this is something we need to discuss so that we don't find ourselves in the same spot. So with that, I hope you found this helpful because this to me was a nice break from the research and the big, kind of sometimes overwhelming things that we go, gosh, how do we even control all this? This was one where you can very tangibly go, hey, this is something we can action against. This is something we can get our arms around and we can mitigate the risks of this. Doesn't mean we won't prevent them completely, but we actually can lean in and take action on this. And so technically you can do all of them. Spot check, make sure you have a user acceptance policy. Make sure you're doing something around effective AI use more broadly, not just do you know how to use the tools we have. Look to see what kind of accountability matrix you have. And maybe that's something that more on the senior level or at the organization, institutional level, you need to examine. But then everybody can be having one of these AI grand rounds with your teams, with your colleagues to talk about where are we vulnerable and what do we do with it. So thanks for tuning in. Please don't forget to subscribe, share with somebody who'd benefit, and visit my website to see if there's any ways I can help you navigate this stuff. But with that, I hope you found this helpful. I'm Christopher Lind, and this has been Future Focused. We will see you on the other side.